Hello, I'm Sean, and welcome to my YouTube retirement channel. Today, we're going to be discussing shadowing, a foreign language technique where one listens and mimics a native speaker speaking your target language. The goal is to repeat as closely as possible the speech, intonation, and speed of a native speaker. So shadowing has many benefits. The main benefit is listening comprehension, where by listening to native speakers and studying native speakers, you develop an ear, or train your ear, to hear nuances in the language. And by repeating those speakers, you also develop your pronunciation skills. But I think shadowing also has two other benefits. Grammar, mainly in reinforcing the grammar you already know, or perhaps studying grammar. It also builds your vocabulary depending on the source material. So how does one go about shadowing? So first and key is to find good source material. You want to choose a recording of a native speaker or speakers that closely align with your language speaking ability. Then you listen very carefully to the speakers and try to repeat and mimic their intonation and their intonation. You want to shadow the speaker. Next, you might want to record yourself to see if there's areas for improvement. Lastly, be patient and persistent. Shadowing takes time and effort. So, what I would like to do for the rest of the video is to show you as a practical matter how I shadow. Now, since my target language is French, we'll be using a target podcast in French. So I've been using a podcast called Real Life French. The link is in the description. It follows two young people, a man and a woman, that are roommates. And the dialogues are brief, only 4 to 5 lines. But they have a lot of variety of topics, grammar, vocabulary, and perhaps most importantly, it is in a modern spoken French. So there's over 700 podcasts for this podcast, so it's actually perfect. It extends over many years, and the material is effectively limitless. So we're going to listen to the podcast first, one particular dialogue, and then we're going to spend a few minutes kind of going over the text, and I wanted to kind of demonstrate why and how shadowing can be very valuable, not just for listening comprehension, but for pronunciation, grammar, as well as vocabulary building. So I'm going to play the video or the sound dialogue for you now. Don't worry about trying to repeat the dialogue now. I just want you to get an idea of what you normally would listen to. You have your dialogue, and what I do is I would play this dialogue. I'd play it once or twice just listening to it. Then I would play it again, this time with the text in front of me, and I would repeat the best I can each line of dialogue as it came. So for example, you might play the first sentence with whatever the material you're listening to, pause it, and try to replicate that phrase. And I will do that for each line of dialogue. Now, what's important is you may have to, at the beginning, break the sentences down into pieces. The goal in the end is to repeat the entire phrase with the same speed and inflection and intonation as the native speaker. But that takes time. As we'll see, the spoken, at least in French, the modern spoken French, has many built-in shortcuts. There's deletion of words, as I say, eating the E, there's many syllables that are being removed, and it will help you condense and speak more fluently. So now just take a listen to the video first. We'll play the video, and then we'll go into more details of the text.
Un dialogue. Mince, je peux pas sortir comme ça ce soir. Je viens de mettre ma chemise et il y a une énorme tache rouge dessus. Je sais pas d'où ça sort.
Aïe, vu la couleur, ça a l'air d'être de la sauce bolognaise. T'as dû te tacher la dernière fois que tu l'as mise sans t'en rendre compte?
Ouais, mais le problème, c'est qu'elle est toujours là après la machine. Comme si elle avait décidé de faire sa vie définitivement sur ma chemise.
Bon, ça tombe bien, j'ai acheté un super détachant. Mais si avec ça part pas, je pense que t'auras pas le choix. Faudra en racheter une autre.
So you've by now listened to the dialogue and try to mimic the speaker to the best of your ability, mimicking their intonation, their speed, their inflection. But I also want to show how how shadowing can be used if you have the correct material, source material, to help understand and reflect your grammar and as well as vocabulary. So I've reproduced the dialogue on the screen, and on each line you'll notice some circles. Now the colors don't mean anything in themselves. I just use different colors to make the presentation easier to view. So on the first line, you'll see on the first circle that phrase je peux pas, in written French or in formal French, that would contain a ne between the je and the peux. But in spoken French, the ne is typically dropped, which is correctly identified here. The next circle under the je viens de, I highlight this because when you listen to the dialogue, you'll notice that the de, the is eaten, therefore becoming viande. The syllable becomes 2 to 1. And this to me is one of the most critical elements in at least learning these French dialogues in shadowing, is that is typically done, and you need to train your ear to recognize that syllables from 2 to 1. The next circle you'll see is for ia. Now, again, in formal or written French, that phrase would be il y a, there is or there are. But here, it becomes ia in spoken French, which is represented on the line. And in the end of that first sentence, the je sais pas, you'll notice, again, you'll see that the ne is eliminated. But interestingly, when you hear the dialogue, you're going to hear the phrase sais pas, not je sais pas. And again, this is a critical item because that in modern spoken French, that phrase becomes sais pas. Now on the next line, for Louise, you'll notice the first green circle where it says ta. Now in written informal French, that would be represented as tu as. But in spoken modern French, it becomes ta. Again, this is critical because that is what you'll hear generally, and you need to train your ear to hear that contraction. It's the same for the next line under fois que. You're going to hear that abbreviated from 2 syllables to 1. Now the next line where I have le problème and c'est qu'elle circled, this is just to show that typical grammar structure where the noun is presented before the c'est. That's just French construction, but it's good to practice hearing it and as well as saying it and using it when you're speaking. Now the last line, I have a few circles here. And the first one, ça tombe bien, I circle that because that is a colloquial phrase that you should understand and be able to hear and reproduce with mainly reflex. The second word, détachant, I highlight this because when I first heard this dialogue, I was not aware of that word. But listening to the dialogue a couple times and hearing the word tachant with a day in front of it, I was able to deduce that it was likely a stain remover, which in fact, that's what that word is. Again, the ça part, the third circle, that is highlighted because, again, the ne is dropped. And the last line, again, the future tense of tu auras has been abbreviated to t'auras, removing a syllable and contracting the word. So the last item you'll notice is the faudra. So again, in formal or written French, it would be normally il faudra, the future tense of falloir. But here in spoken French, the il is dropped, leaving faudra. So it's important again here is to keep the meaning of the phrase and understand the meaning, but understand the sound has been dropped in modern spoken French. So that is generally the end of the video today. So in addressing shadowing, as a few reminders, you want to be able to, again, the first and primary thing is to find good source material. Dialogues at a level that you're comfortable with. Because if it's too new, if there's too much grammar or too much vocabulary, you may get lost or distracted when you're trying to mimic the speech. But when you find that good source material, again, the key is to develop your listening comprehension. And as an ancillary benefit, your pronunciation skills. But as we've seen in the other videos, in the earlier part of the video, you can actually still study your grammar and vocabulary as well, depending on the source material. Now, so in terms of frequency, I actually try to do this shadowing every day. Fortunately, the real life French podcasts are available generally, I think, every day except the weekends. So I will take that video every day, the podcast, and I will do the shadowing exercise. And for me, fortunately, because the dialogues are relatively short, I can go through the full dialogue, again, listening to it twice, reading through it several times, and I will keep practicing the sentences and copying the speakers as many times as necessary to be able to mimic or shadow them when they speak. So I hope that's been helpful. If so, please give this video a thumbs up. And as always, please feel free to subscribe and leave a comment. And let me know if you found this helpful or what you might do or any other helpful techniques you may have. Thank you.